Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breaking the Silence, a podcast produced by Angels Protection Inc., where we amplify the voices that challenge inequity, strengthen institutions, and build pathways for long term community impact. I'm your host, Makaila Davis, founder and chairwoman of Angels Protection Inc., and in today's episode is a part of our Men of Impact series, where we spotlight leaders across organizing, policy, civic engagement, and systems leadership who are transforming communities through strategy, accountability, and action. This series exists because leadership is not about visibility, it's about infrastructure, it's about sustainability, it's about mobilizing people towards purpose, and it's about building systems that outlast moments. This conversation is more than politics, it's about power, it's about community, it's about movement building, and it's about what it truly means to create lasting change. And today's guest embodies that truly. Anthony Davis Jr. is a strategist, organizer, and systems builder whose work focuses on strengthening the infrastructure behind civic engagement, social justice movements, and political campaigns. He's the founder of the Davis System, where he partners with organizations, coalitions, and political campaigns to design winning strategies, strengthen operational capacity, and develop leaders capable of sustaining long term community power. Anthony's work sits at the intersection of organizing, political strategy, and institutional development, helping organizations move beyond short term mobilization toward durable systems that align people, strategy, and infrastructure. Throughout his career, he has led and supported voter engagement initiatives, leadership development programs, and grassroots movement building efforts with organizations and communities across the country. Anthony believes sustainable change requires more than strong campaigns. It requires strong systems, strong leadership, and strong relationships. He is also a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated and an HBCU graduate from Morehouse College, reflecting his commitment to achievement, service, leadership, and community empowerment. What sets Anthony apart is his ability to bridge vision with execution, helping movements build structure that is necessary to create lasting change. So I just want to take a moment to welcome you to the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a great introduction. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
It's all about you, the amazing work that you do. So I kind of just want to start off by asking, what first drew you into organizing and civic engagement work?
There was a very specific moment that I can think of that really like to say like mobilized me in terms of like piquing my interest in politics and civic engagement. And it was actually my freshman year at Morehouse College. It was 2012. It was President Obama's reelection campaign. And my first semester was actually kind of in the heat of, he would be elected in November during my first semester. And so actually coming to campus, I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C., but I like to say that I grew up in a somewhat apolitical household for a lot of different reasons, but I didn't necessarily see activism or civic engagement, voting a lot growing up in my immediate household or in my family across the spectrum. And so, kind of this moment at my freshman year on campus, I remember being over at Spelman's campus. We were having a big watch night for the election returns for the results of the election. And I remember looking around the room and just seeing like how excited my fellow colleagues were, fellow students were, classmates, people who come from similar backgrounds to me, have decided to come to the same institution as me, but they care way more about this thing than I do, and I could tell it wasn't just about like he was a black president and there was the opportunity to elect a black president. It was much deeper than that. And so I realized that, the students that were there that I was noticing around me, they were a lot more engaged and cared a lot more about politics in a way that I didn't. And I remember that moment thinking to myself, like, I need to care more. There's obviously something that I haven't done my due diligence in terms of researching or figuring out how it's impacting my life. And then being in Georgia, we were in Atlanta, which is a blue bubble and a much in a very conservative state in Georgia. And so, I think being there, being on that campus at that time really kind of awakened my consciousness.
I agree. And I think that's a beautiful thing too, being able to have an experience of um, your college and also Spelman coming together and seeing that, and then
Mhm.
colleagues as well. Um, is that something that most people don't get to experience? So that was great to have firsthand. And to kind of tie into that too, I wanted to ask, so how did your experiences shape your approach to leadership and systems building?
Yes. I would say over time, one of the things that I've learned is a few things, or a few things that I've learned when it comes to really like leadership and systems building is one, the importance of mentorship and really giving back to folks that are coming after you. I remember like my first job really, well, every job essentially that I've gotten in politics until the point where I was able to launch my own business was something that I either got through a Morehouse graduate who was someone in a position to hire me, or a member of my fraternity, one of my fraternity brothers. And sometimes the intersection of both of those, Morehouse man and a Kappa man. Um, and I realized that that was as much about them noticing similarities as it was to them giving back to communities that had given so much to them. And so I realized that to really build sustainable systems and to be a good leader, you have to really be thinking about ways to sow back into the folks that are coming after you. And then I would say the other piece is the importance of really humanizing the work. I think sometimes as organizers, as people, I think this applies across industry that people sometimes turn into numbers, and I think that that is a very scary approach to doing the work that we do. When we just look at people as data points, or we just look at them as a number or a part of a larger plan or system, um, then we don't take a human approach to building power, to building infrastructure, and building sustainable power. And for me, as I've kind of had my experience over time, and had times where I didn't feel like my humanity was centered in the work. I've always taken that approach when it comes to me doing the work that I do, is really remembering the people behind the numbers, and the lives and the experiences that are behind those numbers as well.
I agree. Um, Making sure that we're not looking at people as data points. That's really,
Mhm.
um, I think as we're moving forward, in healthcare, public health, community organizing, it's really important. Um, so then I kind of wanted to touch on to infrastructure. So why is it important within social justice and political movements to have sustainable infrastructure?
Yes. So this is one of my favorite questions, and it's a very nuanced question, but it matters a lot. And when we miss it, we miss the opportunity to build real power. So what I like to say is that why infrastructure is so important is it because it allows us to organize um, really into the future. Infrastructure allows us to focus on building the right roots, versus having a tree that is standing on non-sustainable roots. And I think that that's the best analogy is what I've seen over the course of my organizing is that um, when campaigns or organizations don't take the time to focus on building infrastructure, even if they are successful with the campaign, or even if they win and change, are able to get a law change, they're not able to tap back into that infrastructure for the next fight, or for the next campaign, or for the next win. And to me, whether you won or lost that first campaign, if you didn't leave something durable behind after the win or loss, then essentially you lost, the community lost. And what we see is this happens a lot, specifically in states and in places and communities that either don't have the requisite political kind of knowledge, and information, or these happen in places that have been historically kind of underfunded and under-resourced. And so we've ceded a lot of ground. And so what we're seeing is that, in places like Alabama, Mississippi, where I get to do some of my work, is that national campaigns and organizations will come into these spaces and be really extractive from community. They will take advantage of relationships. They'll reach out to community organizations to take advantage of their list, or figure out who are the communities that they can get in contact with. And they may provide some money to support this organizing and this infrastructure built, and this organizing around this issue. But what they don't do is provide training. They don't provide resources for the organizations to organize beyond just this one moment. And that's what builds non-durable infrastructure. What I've seen over my time is that campaigns spend a lot of times building up to win on election day, and don't think about the long-term effects of the community beyond election day. And so that's where also, when we think about civic engagement, um, infrastructure is what fuels civic engagement. When you have infrastructure built, when people feel connected, to each other, when people feel resourced, when organizers feel as though like they can continue to organize and don't have to worry about putting food on their tables or don't have to worry about um, whether or not people are going to show up for their events because they've been in this community, they've been organizing in this community for years. That allows for a lot more successful and durable organizing.
No, I agree, especially as you touched on when it comes to elections and not following, up with that afterwards. Everybody's just like, okay, back to normal. I think that's really important to address that because that happens a lot. um,
Hmm.
there's a big hype around it and then it just goes to the wayside. So continuing that's really important. That's why it's important that you have your business that you created that can kind of help bridge that gap. Um, so then I also wanted to touch on too, what inspired you to launch the Davis system?
Yes. So from experience working on campaigns, I would say between 2017 and 2021, I worked on like 7 or 8 campaigns in different parts of the country. Worked on a campaign in Alabama, Mississippi, in Georgia, in Maryland, where I'm originally from. Worked on a campaign here in Boston. So I had a chance to move around to different parts of the country and work on campaigns. I actually worked on a presidential campaign during that time period as well. Um, and across the board in each one of those campaigns, what I recognized was that the rooms where the decisions were being made um, often didn't have people who looked like you and I in those rooms, right? They didn't have people who looked like us. And furthermore, obviously, couldn't have people who spoke to our lived experiences. But what politics has become almost a race for our votes, has become a race for how you engage and not only engage, but mobilize the Black community. How Black men votes have become even more of a conversation over the last few years. Um, and I would say that that's because the people who've been in the rooms making these decisions about how politicians communicate, what type of programs politicians are rolling out, have been primarily white men, and white cisgendered men at that. And so there's such a wide swath of lived experience that's missing when you just have cisgendered white men who are usually older in the positions of making these decisions. And so, from time to time, from my experience of working on campaigns, I noticed those blind spots. I noticed that there were times where I was being told to do something that wouldn't resonate with the community, or, I was being challenged to go into a community and just be extractive, just take things from the community. And I realized that, as much as like my campaign manager or even the candidate may be the person who's communicating that expectation to me, usually that was coming from some type of consultant who told them that's the way that they needed to think. And so for me, the reason why I launched the Davis system was to um, bring a different approach to consulting, to political consulting, understanding that, going back to the point I made earlier, that people are not just numbers, that to actually approach these type of communities, it takes care, it takes cultural understanding, it takes cultural competency, and not just coming into our communities to ask us for our votes, 2 weeks out from election day, which is what we see quite often in Black and Brown communities. And so the reason for starting the business was ideally, one campaign at a time that we had the chance to work on, that we could change that approach, that we could change the way of thinking about this work. And it goes back to the question that you asked me right before this one, that we actually do a better job of trying to push people to build power versus just accomplish a goal. We when we take on contracts, when we take on clients, all of our plans, the things that we write out, the proposals that we write out, um, are built in a way that builds sustainable power and allows people to realize their power. I think one of the things that a lot of organizations that we've had a chance to work with, very well intended, have great programs that are geared towards or targeted towards our communities, right? But they don't have someone who feels comfortable going to our communities. Like, oh, we don't know if we can go into that complex or to that neighborhood. And so the resource doesn't actually reach the people. They're waiting for the people to come to them versus taking the resource to them. And so that's just been a change in just approach that we apply across the board as well.
No, I love that. And it's so funny and interesting when it comes to organizations that get all this money and they get, this money to purchase product that is to help serve the community, and then they don't want to take it to the community and expect
Hmm.
that community to come to them when there's so many reasons why they can't come to you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Transportation, you know, or fear because of what has happened in the past when it comes to access to services. I may not feel comfortable walking up to this nonprofit or government agency and asking for a quote unquote handout.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. And if I work traditional work hours, or if I work outside of traditional work hours, if I'm not available in a 9 to 5, or you know, if the resource is only available to people during work hours, then most our communities were at work. And so, all right, what are you doing after hours to make it accessible to still take this to the community? And it's like those small kind of nuanced ways of thinking that I feel like only people from the communities would understand that. But those are not the people who are usually being put in positions to make decisions.
That is true, especially that's such a good point, especially when it comes to like Christmas drives or turkey drives. A lot of times they'll have them during the week during work hours
Hmm.
because I see the
Hmm.
flyers. I see
Hmm.
the flyers.
Hmm.
I'm like, who's coming between 12 and 3, on a Wednesday?
Right, right.
Like, because those working people, they still need support because a lot of people are not, that might not be making minimum wage or making minimum wage. So they can't afford a $40 worth of turkey or chicken, for the holidays. So, that's always very interesting to me. Or even if it's any resource, diapers, wipes, like 9 out of 10, you got to think about that they could be working a job where they have to clock into, obviously during the day. So being mindful, but that was such a good, yeah, point. I also wanted to kind of go into two, how can organizations better engage younger generations in civic leadership?
This is another topic that I'm really passionate about, and one that we take on a lot with my firm. And we do a lot of this work pro bono. I think this is something that it's more about passion than it is about making money. And it's like going back to the point that I made earlier about giving back and really pouring back into communities that you come from. Um, I think organizations have done a hmm, the organizations that we've had a chance to work with have done a good job of thinking about and talking about younger people, but it goes back to the point we were just talking about actually making programs accessible for younger people. And then I think the other thing is like one, meeting younger people where they are. So a lot of that is social media. And so like using digital tools and platforms to like make your programming more accessible for younger people, but also make it more engaging. I think that too often it's like the programming, you can tell it wasn't built by someone in that age range. And so it's not appealing to people in that age range. Which goes to another piece that I like to encourage folks, which is like bring more young people into leadership. I was recently at a conference in Alabama where I got asked a similar question to this, and they were like asking where to start when it comes to young people and getting them engaged. And I talked to them about like, why don't you talk to your SGA presidents in the schools in your communities? Like those are young people who have gone through some type of political democratic process to be elected to SGA president, so they care to an extent about civic engagement or at least engagement within their schools. And they probably also know how to encourage other students in their communities to care about something. They got them to vote for them. And so like that's a good place to start. But it's also it is making sure that there are like to that point, making sure that there are young people involved in leadership to help you actually craft your outreach to younger people. Someone, I'm sure you probably have experienced this in your different walks of life, but I always tell people like I don't want to be the youngest person in the room. I'm now like 32. I'm married. I have a business. I've been out of college for 10 plus years. Like I don't know. I'm literally celebrating my 10-year anniversary this year. Like I don't know how to engage a student on college campus. But to tell me that we don't need them, like we absolutely need them engaged in the fight. And so to me, it's like who is a younger person that I could start to work with, that I can start to mentor, that I can engage, who I can pour the skills, the knowledge, the things that I have into them to help them better engage their communities. And I think like more and more people took that approach. I it's tough to see like organizations led by 60-plus-year-old people that are geared towards supporting and targeting young people. It's like they can do it, they may have the time and they may have the energy and resources, but it's like, how are they also bringing in other young people to help them with running the organization?
I agree. That's really important to touch on too, because a lot of these organizations are ran by folks that are, 50, 60 plus. Um, and another thing, which I'm going to talk about it, is the boards.
Mm, mm,
It's been something that's been on my mind recently because a lot of these boards do not have young representation. And I'm talking about the,
absolutely.
the government committees, because there's a difference between boards and committees.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
committee work doesn't represent a lot of the youth. The actual board itself of the agency does not represent when it comes to government and nonprofit. Same with the committees. Then also when we're looking at, which is a whole nother thing, for-profit organizations, boards, those Fortune 500 companies obviously do not represent the youth. It's folks that are really 60 plus, sitting in these positions and there's no representation of the youth, which is a big problem. And then there's no pipelining programs really
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
for,
mm-hmm.
to prepare if they want to, sit on a board or some type of pipelining for recruitment for that, right? Because a lot of those opportunities are by invitation. You're a friend to somebody and they see your skill set and it's needed here. But I think it's important to bridge the gap with training, right, for these leadership roles and also for board recruitment, because that's a big one too, to be able to recommend policy change within an organization
Absolutely.
at a higher level than if it's not just management or executive leadership. You want to be at the top, making the change that, follows suit through the organization. So I think it's a whole nother thing, but it's really important for our youth to pipeline there.
Can I say something to that point really quickly? Just you use the word pipeline, and that is something that like I am so heavily invested in, like through my work with the business. My wife, who's also my business partner, she's an alumni of Salem State University here in Massachusetts, where we live. And for the last 5 years now, we've been teaching a class on their campus that's solely about like running for office or how to run a campaign. And it's to your point about like for her, this has been an opportunity to really give back to another community that gave her so much. But it's also been an opportunity for us to create a pipeline. Now we've had, students from that class who have gone on to run for SGA president and won on campus. They've gone on to work on campaigns and won successful campaigns. We've got a few of them come to work for our business. And so it's like also like to your point, like the pipeline is so important. And there was, and admittedly, so like there was a generation gap probably between like our parents' generation and us, where it was like there was like this like gap in leadership development. It was like telling us how to like raise successful families and how to navigate being Black in America. But the Black elected officials, we saw a large gap in them, or we saw numbers dwindle between generations. And when you think about like the early 60s, the civil rights, the height of the civil rights movement, even like post Reconstruction, like we had so many more elected officials versus so many more Black elected officials versus what we see now on the federal level. And so um, just the importance of that pipeline, and even in one generation, like us not doing that work to give back or like to train up the next versions of ourselves, we lost a lot of power in that way.
We sure did. And that's funny you touched on that. And that's a big one, early 1900s. And to which we're going to talk about in a second when it comes to the organizations and sororities and fraternities. But there was a lot of that mobilization and coming together as a unit. Um, and it did, there was a lot of suppression during our parents' generation, and now we're trying to pick it back up.
Hmm.
But like you said, there is a lost art of not training ourselves up, that next generation, because we really need to get back to where we were those early 1900s and 1960s, where the movement was heavy. And I know it looks differently now, but it's still there. It's just in a different form. So
Mhm.
I think that's really important, a mentorship and sponsorship, because there's a difference between being a mentor to somebody and being somebody's sponsor and actually getting them in the room, not just
Mm,
telling them about the room or telling
that's
them
good.
about a resource. But, you know, if you have been given a privilege to be in a certain space, you know, and to, to showcase your skill set, you should be bringing that person with you, whether that's to an event, to a gala, to a function, um, so they can see that for themselves and they can network on their own as well in that space, you know? So it's just
That's
making
good.
it easier. So I think sponsorship is really important because I feel like I've had so many mentors and not enough sponsors.
That's good. That's really good. I like that.
Yeah, not enough people saying, "Hey, there's this gal over here that I'm a member of this organization. I think that you should come with me. I'll pay for your ticket."
And there's been plenty of times where it's like, you've probably seen someone as a mentor who was in one of those spaces and it's like, hey, like, could I get that invite next time? Can you think of me next time? Yeah.
We have conversations every other day, and then you come back and then you tell me about this event.
Hmm.
Or
Hmm.
I've seen it on social media. And I'm like, oh, doesn't everybody look pretty in their dresses and their black tie suits? Like, I need that. I need to be preview to that. And it's really important too, because especially when it comes to organizations and memberships, right? Like if
Hmm.
right now a lot of the older generation, they're in them, but how do we also get there too? Because if you don't bring us or show us, and maybe that will become an interest to us, how can we then qualify to be in that space? That should be the overarching goal moving forward. Um, so yeah, that was really important that you touched on. And then I also wanted to ask too as well, why is leadership development critical for sustaining movements and organizations?
Yeah. So it goes to the point that we've kind of just been talking about. Whereas I think that one, it's critical for our movements to have young people a part of them right now, where they are right now. Like that term, like I believe the children are our future. Like, no, they are the now. Like they've always been the now. Like movements have never been sustained without young energy. When we think about even like as recent as 2020, when there was like this racial awakening, reckoning in our country around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, um, like a lot of that and a lot of the visuals from that time period were young people who were able to be out in the streets throughout the summer, who weren't in school, who could sustain the movement. When we think about like and we may touch on this a little bit more, but when we think about organizations across the South, from like Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, CORE, which was started on Jackson State University's campus. Like these organizations were started by young people and sustained by young people. And so the the importance of leadership development in that is that we have to, as people who have more lived experience, help the young people to direct their energy and their anger. I think sometimes the what younger when I look at some of the younger movements that have started out, the reason why sometimes they burn really brightly, but they don't burn for a long time is because there's righteous anger that kick things off, and it can mobilize people, it can get people out into the streets, it can get people to show up and protest or be out, holding signs, creating signs in the streets. But it's the next step that is so critical, and that is what comes from leadership development. Young people necessarily haven't had the opportunities or the experiences to watch a movement burn bright and flame out really quickly, or they haven't had the experiences of actually taking a protest into turning it into a policy. But there are people who have that experience. And so that is why leadership development is so important, because we don't want our young people to feel as though, one, they don't have the support that they need, one, but then two, that there is no I think one of the other things that it's a fear of mine in a lot of this organizing space is that young people feeling as though there's no hope, um, and that they lose hope. Brian Stevenson says, "Hope is our superpower," and I really do. I believe that. I think that for young people, part of the leadership development and training that we need to give them is the ability to sustain these movements and understanding that like these wins don't happen overnight. And even though social media may look like, some folks are getting instant gratification, like in this work, it's going to take it takes like some endurance to sustain these movements. So even to that point of leadership development, like that type of training and leadership development can actually help us sustain movements and organizations as well.
I agree. And to me, it really ties back to pipelining. Um,
Hmm.
and I know when I was on my leadership journey, around 18, and it was difficult, but I knew I wanted to be a leader. Like I knew that. I knew I was doing my nonprofit, but I knew that there was a gap because I was younger. And
Hmm.
when you're younger and then you're going to be in competitive spaces with folks that are 20 years, 30 years older. When it times to graduate college, you're going up against those people to get a job. Like, seriously, you're going up against
Hmm.
20 years of experience.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
cannot make up for that. So, how
Hmm.
can I make sure that my resume is robust and I'm putting my best foot forward to be in that competitive space as a young person? So, I, like we talked about earlier, the pipelining programs, like there needs to be more of that, more of the sponsorship, the mentorship for the youth, and combining all of that. At least right now where we are, because it's really hard to get into certain spaces. Um,
Yeah. And I think for people who are in positions like those who have resources, whether it be knowledge or financial resources or, network resources, like it is a better this is probably unpopular, especially within our community, but there is a onus and responsibility on us to avail ourselves to be a resource. I think that too often, like, especially like in my position, like as I'm a novice, 5 years into being a business owner, running a minority-owned business. Um, there are people who've been doing and navigating this space 20 plus years my senior who come from similar backgrounds, and I would love if some of them made themselves available for me. You knew what it was like being in the early stages of running a business, and you don't necessarily have the time to reach out and take advantage of every single resource that you may know is out there, but you don't have the time to sit and really think about it. Like it would be lovely if one of those, like, somebody who's a Black business owner who's been running a business for 20 to 30 years reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I'd love to mentor you. Like, I see the work that you're doing. I'd love to mentor you." There's onus and responsibility on me in that way, but I think like if there was more people available, then there would be more people taking advantage of it. I think that there's less of people availing themselves for that, whether it be, we don't have to go down that road of why, but I think it is, there are less people availing themselves who are in positions to give back.
no, I agree. Especially in times like this, it's really important to build community around one another.
Mm.
That being said, I'm touching on community, brotherhood, and service. So, as a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, how has the fraternity influenced your leadership journey?
Oof. It's been very pivotal in me stepping into being a leader. You said earlier that you started your leadership journey around 18, and I feel I feel similarly. I feel like as I was coming into college, like I started my own community service organization on campus after my freshman year. Um, I was, involved on I wrote for our student paper on campus. But being a part of and joining Cap Alpha Psi really pushed me to see myself um, in a greater light. I think um, try not to get emotional because as I'm talking about this, I think about a very specific moment in my like trajectory of being a leader that ties back to my fraternity. And it was after we crossed, as I was a sophomore. Um, we were in elections seasons, and those can get very heated for positions within the chapter. And so um, we were going back and forth, and we 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 had we had made the decisions on positions. I was elected our keeper of records, which is essentially like the secretary role. Um, and I did that for our first semester on the yard. And then going into our second semester on the yard, our vice president at the time, he said, "Hey, like, I think I need to step down for personal reasons, focus on school, focus on family, etc." And he essentially came to me and was like, "I think you should take the vice president role." Um, and honestly, like, one, going back to like how contentious these roles can be, like I didn't want to have to like fight or like argue with anybody. I was cool with my secretary role, keeping notes in the meetings, etc. Um, but I remember him really like pushing for it. And then when we brought it to our line as a whole, like there wasn't any pushback from them. Um, and so in that moment, I realized that maybe there was something that people were seeing in me that I wasn't seeing in myself, and specifically my line brothers. And so like as I've gone on to like as I've grown as a leader and grown in my professional career, like I always go back and I thank them all the time. I'm really thankful for them because that moment really um I think pushed me out of my comfort zone as a leader, which is, I think, the best way to grow as a leader. Is continuing to put yourself in uncomfortable positions that you can learn a lot from, but then also grow from as well. And I think from that, like my senior year, I was the president of our chapter on campus. And 10 years later, like I'm still the one who organizes the line meetings. I'm still the one like leading within our line, our immediate kind of community there. But I apply a lot of what I learned from being a leader on campus and like in these 10 years post. Um, I credit a lot of that to my role in the fraternity.
Yeah, and I think there's a beautiful thing with Black fraternities and sororities as a whole. You know,
Mm, mhm.
being able to have an opportunity and be selected, somebody seeing something in you that you don't see it in yourself, and that one opportunity that you shared right there that happened. It's a beautiful thing. It's really
Yeah.
a beautiful thing. And yeah, I'm just gonna shout out my sororities. I'm just gonna
Shout out.
I have to shout out the best sorority and 1908 Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated because we are the best. Just had to say that. Um, no, but it's really it's a wonderful thing. All the sororities and fraternities, I have love for everybody, and I feel like it's wonderful work. Um, and I feel like it's important. One thing to showcasing it more to the youth so that
Hmm.
it exists and that it's something to potentially aspire to.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's a really beautiful thing that it plays within the community and then within your own self-development too. Like you said, you had that opportunity. They seen you, they said, "Oh, I think you'll be wonderful for vice president." You did it. I know there was a lot of growing pains with it. And then you ended up being president of the chapter that next year.
Hmm. And the
Um,
network, to your point, is just like I mean, it's unmatched. I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, I know you all have the network nationally, globally. But it's really being able. And I talked about this earlier, like having been almost dropped into a lot of different states, communities over time for my political work. Like, I feel like one of the first things I always was like, always did was like, where the capitals, like, who's the local chapter, like, who can I get in contact with, because they can help me orient myself to the rest of the community, to the rest of to the state, to the city, etc. Um, and just like that network has been invaluable throughout my life as well.
I agree. It's like no matter where you go, you have family. And
Hmm.
I just recently joined Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated last week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
And I have been seeing the impact of it, and it's a
Hmm.
really a beautiful thing. It's different when you're not a member, but when you become one and being a part of the D9 family, seeing that how everybody's everywhere, you know,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you never know. And you're like, oh, like I've been seeing so many more AK license plates, like so much so
Yep.
I'll be driving, I'm like, wow. And I want to beep so bad, but then she's just oh, so can't get but it's just it's such a great thing. And yeah, like just like you said, no matter where you move to, there's always going to be a
Hmm.
brothers that you can reach out to and connect with, and that will be there for you, help you with whatever you need, whether it's a job or an opportunity, and knowing what's in the community that you're now in. So not everybody has that. So it's a beautiful thing when you're connected, and the network is unmatched. Really.
Definitely, definitely.
So I also wanted to touch on too. You're a graduate of a wonderful HBCU, Morehouse College. So how do Black colleges play in civic engagement and community impact?
Yeah. So, um, wow. Well, to your point, like I think Morehouse has a very like unique history, but it applies across the board at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Um, I think first it is helping. It's helping folks find community first. I think one of the beautiful things about um, one of my favorite things about going to an HBCU was realizing, and something that you know anecdotally, but that there's so many different types of Black people. And that even like, you know, my freshman class coming in with 500, 600 Black men for the most part, who all come from different backgrounds. One of the things I always joke about is like my first cultural shock being on campus was seeing that there were people who were my age who were preaching,
Mm.
who were like they were head like whether they were heads of churches or like they may be an assistant pastor at their father or their grandfather's church. But like seeing that allows you to, I think, have a greater understanding and almost appreciation for Black people, and for Black folks as a whole. And then I would say like the historical kind of involvement, across the board, whether you look at Morehouse College, where you look at Spelman, you look at Jackson State University in Mississippi, you look at Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi. There's a number of HBCUs, so shouldn't start listing them because then I'll get in trouble. But they've all, in a local sense, played a major role, especially when you think about across the South in civil rights movements. Historically, when Black folks couldn't attend predominantly white institutions to get higher education. That's why historically Black colleges were started and founded. And we've had amazing, alumni come out who've gone on to do amazing things, whether it be Dr. Martin Luther King at Morehouse, your soror, Kamala Harris, who was a graduate of Howard University. That list also goes on and on in terms of HBCU grads, Spike Lee, um, you know, folks that have gone on to be successful in different industries um, across the spectrum as well. And so the role that I feel like Black fraternities plays and colleges plays is very similar. It's allowing people to realize that there's a pathway to success through your own community and sticking with your own community. I think that's been one of the most beautiful things that I've learned about, being going to a Black college, is that you hear a lot in high school like the world is not like that. But what I realized is that being in that space allowed me to grow more comfortable in my identity in those 4 years on that campus. It allowed me to meet people who were similar to me, who had come from similar backgrounds to me, who've gone on to be successful. Um, but then I think a lot what we see on HBCUs as well, and I'll stop here, is just that they've been breeding grounds for successful movements, and they've been breeding grounds for successful people. When you think about, at Morehouse, we learn a lot about the student movement in Atlanta in the '60s, and this is with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, organizing marches, organizing rallies on campus. Like there's a historic kind of a tradition of organizing and civic engagement on historically Black colleges, campuses. And so even for a student like me who came to campus and wasn't political, didn't really care about politics, it's like you can't be on that campus for 4 years and not be politicized. Realize that your identity and that your just who you are as as a Black person has always been politicized, and that when you decide to stay out of the conversation and out of and don't engage in the process, all you're doing is hurting yourself and your communities. And so, I really feel like HBCUs do a great job of really instilling that into us.
I agree. Especially when you touched on how many successful people have been brought out from HBCUs. Is really critical. And a lot of the sororities and fraternities have been founded on HBC campuses as well. Um,
Mhm.
so that's a really good point that you made. And now I want to kind of tie it back into your vision and legacy for the future. So what legacy do you hope that your work leaves behind? And also, in addition to that, what gives you hope about the future of organizing and community leadership?
Yeah, so I'll take the first piece first. Legacy, what I really hope that my legacy leaves behind is a new model, a new way of doing things that is sustainable. That more people will realize the importance of um, this pipeline work that we've talked so much about here. That it is just as important for me to get ahead as it is for me to create pathways for the folks coming from behind me to get ahead as well. And I think that like in our society right now, when we think about like I look at politics from so many different angles, but even like when we look at some of the elected officials who are, you know, almost at the age of like I don't want to say like they're on death's doorstep. I mean, for lack of better terms. But these people are like we've had so many elected officials die in office um, or get sick and have to step down from office, and they don't have a successor that they've chosen that they know is going to uphold like the legacy of, you have congressional members who've been in their seats for 30, 40 years and they get sick, they pass away in that seat, and then somebody with a totally different ideology comes in and they undo the work that you've done for 30 to 40 years. To me, that is a failure on that person. And so it is understanding the importance of pipelines in us being able to build these movements. And hopefully that the legacy that I'm leaving behind is a model of actually, addressing that pipeline issue. And then in terms of hope for the future of organizing and community leadership, one, young people. I think it's hard for me to when I think about the word hope, it's hard for me to separate it from them because I think that even in our generation, like I'm a part of the millennial generation. I think that we've gotten so many things wrong and skewed towards more self sustainability than community sustainability. And I think that that has been at the a decision that has led us to some of the places that we are now. And so I'm looking at the next generations to kind of right some of those wrongs that we've gotten wrong. And then I would say two, and this is probably something that's difficult to say, but I think how bad things are right now actually gives me hope for for the future of organizing and community leadership because what we're seeing right now is I think there is an opportunity and there is a chance for people to fade and for us to lose people from the movement. But what I'm seeing is that what's happening, on the federal level, what's happening even locally in some of our states, it's just actually encouraging more people to get into organizing. I do a lot of work with community organizations around the country, and I think about how many organizations that are still organizing and still sustainable today in 2026 started in 2020 around Breonna Taylor and around what happened to George Floyd. And like those organizations are still doing the work 6 years later now. And so, yes, there can be a moment that like starts an organization and is led off and it could be a really horrific moment. But it's what you do with that that really shows like the hope for the future of community organizing, and to know that organizations and people and individuals didn't just allow that to be just a flash in the pan moment, but to actually build infrastructure and to build power off of that moment. That gives me a lot of hope.
I agree. I think that there is hope for the future generation. Just making sure that, like you touched on, I'm passing that torch and identifying a successor and training them up so that they can qualify. So they're right behind you as you're progressing. They're literally progressing with you.
Mhm.
I think that's really important. And now the $1 million question: how can folks stay connected to you and the work that you do?
Yes. So the Davis System LLC is really on all social media platforms. Find us there. And then Anthony Davis Jr. On Instagram, I'm the AJ System, and then pretty much every other platform, you can search me by Anthony Davis Jr. Just started writing on Substack, so that's going to be the platform that I'm pushing out most and encouraging folks to follow along on.
Perfect. So, guys, please connect with him, and he's doing amazing work within the community with his business. So please, please, please connect. And then I also wanted to just say thank you so much, Anthony, for your leadership and your commitment to building systems that empower communities and create sustainable change. Your work reminds us that movements are strongest when they're rooted not only in passion, but in structure, accountability, and collective vision. And to our listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you, stay connected with Breaking the Silence podcast and Angels Protection Inc. as we continue uplifting leaders who are transforming communities through purpose-driven leadership. And always remember, silence protects systems, not people. So let's keep breaking it together. Take care, everybody, and like, comment, and subscribe.